Can I see? This one.
Turn you? Yeah. Hi. I'm sorry for the slight delay at the beginning. I want to advertise a little. The reason sometimes we have little delays because we record all the sessions. So all the sessions are actually part of a body of knowledge for the Service Society. So all the material will be online, and that's why we have to go through a specific sequence of steps to record all the material. And you can find the material online after the conference. So thank you for coming to the plenary panel number 4. And the theme of the panel is convergence of cloud and big data. This is not surprising. And we would like to talk more about what would we use this technology for. So I'm Carlton Pu, and I'm with Georgia Institute of Technology. And we have set a panelist that I will introduce in a moment. And I just want to have a couple minutes to introduce the theme of the panel. So when cloud computing became a buzzword, a lot of people think that, okay, this buzzword is not going to stay. But turns out that both cloud computing and big data are buzzwords, and they have very deep reality behind them. And I'll give you an example to prove this in a moment. But the main thing that we want to look into today is what these realities of cloud computing and big data can affect us. And this is from the technology point of view, and there are many other dimensions like economic, societal, and human. So those are things that we'll be looking into. So I want to convince you that big data and the cloud are realities, and this is Google data. We have a Google VP here that can update us on the numbers, but this is a big company, and they probably have more data than anyone else. And they have many data centers around the world, and the last number I could find is that they're drawing 260 megawatts in 2011. So they're probably maybe a few times more than that today. But another example I want to give is says data center in Utah, and nobody knows how many bytes they have. But this is their data center, and they draw 65 megawatts. So give you an idea, this is about half of Salt Lake City. That's the largest city in Utah. So if you look into the picture, you will see a few little specks down there in the parking lot. Those are cars. That give you an idea how big this is. So Google is a few times more, but around the world globally. So clearly, big data and cloud computing are realities that will be here to stay. So the main questions that I propose to the panelists, and also challenges in this case, 3, and they are free to talk about any topic of their liking. So the first one is potential benefits of this convergence versus its risks. So of course, the main, one of the major questions here is massive surveillance. I used say example to bring this up. Clearly, we have a gain of security, and but most people also agree that so far we have a loss of privacy. So the second question, the challenge is technical challenges in terms of the work that we're doing, the papers that we're publishing, the software we're writing to achieve these benefits. And but on the other hand, we have ethical, legal, and social implications of the work that we're doing. So everything that we're doing for good could also be used for evil. And what do we do about that? So there are examples of this, and one particular illustrative example is scalable graph algorithms that our keynote speaker this morning talked about. And also, on the other hand, this may lead to big brother knowledge of each one of us. So the third question is potential benefits for the developed countries and the haves versus the potential benefits for the developing countries, the have-nots. So, for example, one of the hot topics here in the United States is personalized precision medicine. And I think one of the panelists earlier said, oh, okay, today we have decoding of each person's genome, genes at $1,000. And the numbers I hear is in 3 years, it's going to be $50 to decode our genes. So that's really a number that we can think about, and it's going to be almost the price of a flu shot to get your genes decoded, and then you can have a lot of benefits from there. But on the other hand, if you go to Africa and many Asian villages, they have actually no health care of any kind. They don't have doctors, don't have anything. So can we do something about that? So if you look at the program, you'll see that we had a loss of one panelist, Professor Pravani Thrasingam, couldn't make it. She had important meetings in Washington and other places. But we did have a couple of additions. So we have Professor Brian Blake of the University of Miami, and Professor Peter Cheng of CMU, and Professor Henning Schustring of Columbia University. Those are panelists that we have contracted, and we're lucky also to have a keynote speaker this afternoon, Eric Brewer, to join us. So Brian is Vice Provost for Academic Affairs and Dean of Graduate School at University of Miami. And he has many professional services that he's handling. And if you want your papers accepted here, listen to what Brian has to say. So he's editor-in-chief of Internet Computing. He's associate editor of Transactional Service Computing. And he served and helped us as a PC area chair for the cloud conference this year. And Professor Peter Cheng was introduced during the opening ceremonies, and he has done many things, distinguished career scientist and faculty member at CMU. He's well known for his work as originator of the ER model, and he received many awards and recognitions that I will not talk about, but he passed the stage where we talk about award he receives. So he's collecting now awards that are given his honor. So I know only 2, there may be more. So every year at the ER conference, actually there's a Peter Cheng Award for Conceptual Modeling. And starting this year, here at this conference, there is going to be a Peter Cheng Big Data Young Researcher Award. So there may be more awards. So if you want to get awards in conferences, you better listen to what Peter Cheng has to say. Right? So third panelist is Henning Schustring, and he's Chief Technology Officer of Federal Communication Commission, and also Jesse Levi Professor at Columbia. And Henning is well known for his work as co-originator of SIP, Session Initiation Protocol, and also key protocol that enabled voice over IP. And in case you have not heard of SIP, your smartphone uses SIP probably a few times every second. So we all have been using technology that Henning has started. And so if you want to have your technology used by other people, you want to hear what Henning has to say. So before we start the talks by the panelists, I want to also mention that Eric Brewer, our keynote speaker this afternoon, has graciously agreed to join the panel. There have been many questions for Eric after his keynote. So if you have some questions for Eric, this is another opportunity for you to ask. And let me just go back here a little bit to the final question here, potential benefits for the haves and have-not. I want to mention that Eric, in his copious spare time, worked on a well-known project in developing appropriate technologies for developing countries. He had actually did some field work in India. So he will be the person to talk to not only about technologies that Google is developing for us, but also technologies for people who don't have a lot of infrastructure. So personally, I like to sit down there when the panelists are giving presentations so I can see the slides. And so if Brian can come up here, he will be the first to present. And we have agreed to let the panelists sit down there. And after the 3 presentations, we exempted Eric from giving a presentation. We usually actually don't overburden our keynote speaker with other duties, so we're really grateful that he agreed to sit up here for the question and answer period. Brian.
Good evening, everyone. I guess it's getting later in the evening, so I hope everyone got a chance to get a cup of coffee. So this slide's a little bit misleading. I guess I'm in a transitional phase now, moving from Miami to Drexel starting in 3 weeks. So if you look for me in 3 weeks, I'll have a different affiliation. My comments are going to be based on an area which we, over the last 2 years, just started. Traditionally, my research has been in service composition and particularly software engineering. We ran a web service composition competition for many years, looking for different software engineering approaches for developing service composition systems. And then over the last 5 years, we moved into the cloud and we were looking at how do you span web services across different cloud computing infrastructures. And just recently, we actually started working with systems that overlap machine computing elements with elements of computation that's being performed by humans. So I was very interested in this panel because I think my contribution here will be looking at how do you take big social data and overlap that with the types of things that you can do traditionally in a cloud computing, more analytical, traditional analytical systems environment. So the big question I'm asking here is combining social data and crowd intervention with traditional big data analytics. What are the benefits? What are the open challenges? And as we've moved through this area, we've started to look at how do you develop software that or services that support crowds that actually are able to help you with analytical tasks. And it's a little bit more nuanced because you aren't just developing systems that are angular, that are just made for traditional systems, but you're developing systems that have sort of a social, humanistic quality to it. So you have to think about how humans do things and then try to encode that into your software. So one area, I want to motivate this area a bit over something that's probably not such an exciting and sort of a disaster, but part of what occurred here really enlightened some of the things that we were able to do as computer scientists and as information technology professionals in this area. So I think hopefully everyone here remembers the Boston Marathon bombing of a couple of years ago. One of the things that was unique about this is that the FBI actually released a couple of pictures from the suspects very early on, and it was kind of one of the first times that it was you had this massive release of this information, and then you had a massive influx of information from different sources, particularly from humans. So citizens began to produce a massive amount of photos. So if you were at the Boston Marathon and you had photos, they were pretty much sending in all their photos. So you had all of these people who were there who had sort of they had some, I guess, a personal interaction with the event, but they were sending their photos in. And they were sending in suggestions and text and all this information. So I don't believe the FBI at the time realized they were going to have such an influx of data, and how they processed that data was in a very traditional way. In addition, once those pictures released, they had this what they call a witch hunt effect. That means that the people who were there began to do their own personal investigation. So, and then you got, as a result of that, you got a large amount of false positives. So people saying this is something it really wasn't. In addition, where I guess coming back to the traditional machines, you actually had traditional image recognition software that was trying to compare these pictures. And that software, although it's evolved over the years, is still not that great when you're actually getting snippets of pictures you have emotions, you have shadows, in some of these cases, it might be more advantageous to have a human that's looking at pictures and say, okay, that's a piece of a book bag that we're looking for. So all this in totality says, and then in addition to that, it was temporal. So the data came in more and more each day, and the data either got better or worse. The way the processing was occurring it could only handle a certain amount of information. So when we looked at it as a research group, we said, wouldn't it be interesting is as data came in and we realized how well a particular software was performing or how well a particular set of humans, either people who were there or people who kind of understand this area, were included, could you do resource allocation and say, okay, give this amount to the machines, give this amount to people in the crowd, or do a first pass with machines and then go to the crowd, or do a first pass with experts and then go to the machines. So we really were looking for ways to, I guess Shahram Duster calls it elastic programming. Can we find ways to actually make algorithms that's smart enough that in real time begin to develop understanding performance and developing different allocation approaches to kind of most effectively deal with the large amount of data? And this is only, marginally big data, I would say, in a sense. So what are the challenges here? Data are diverse and can be big data scale. So you have to think about how to do these things. You really don't have a priori knowledge. You have to think about how to do these things in real time. Data and stakeholders evolve over time. Analytical tasks can be tedious in some cases, but also can be quite complex. So tedious tasks seems to argue to have machines, and more complex argues that when it's very nuanced, that maybe humans can be the best computation for you. So results and conclusions from data can be hierarchical. So as you learn more about the actual corpus of data, you might know more about the individual decisions you have to make. And then finally, automated software is appropriate for some tasks, while human intelligence may be more effective than others. So these are the kind of things, the nuances. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've discovered as we start looking at, okay, how would you mechanize crowdsourcing environments? So as you incorporate crowdsourcing, things become the flip on its head. So you have a working consumer, which is pretty interesting because you get value creation for people who are actually involved, and they take on different roles. So people who you used to be serving with services now becomes a service of the producer as a producer of information. So the roles have actually reciprocated in a sense where a company might say, I'm going to use my clients to try to figure out what's the best way to proceed. Also, you have different motivation. Motivation can be money or financial gain in some sense. In other cases, with when you think about the crowd, there's actually this sort of notion of compensation alternative, like attention and trends and access to real information. So, and then content is not always on demand. Sometimes you have content that you get for free. People are pretty much sharing their content through YouTube or Wikipedia or other social media. So how do you garner that content in such a way that it's most useful in scenarios like the one I described? There's lower levels of risk. You can kind of, you can hire and fire almost at your leisure. And then how you compensate could be based on how well the performance is there. So low quality work is rejected, high quality work is encouraged and compensated. So this is a different way of thinking about how you do your performance analysis. Finally, you have to figure out how to recruit. So it's everyone here has a mobile phone. So if I had to compare, everyone here has a mobile phone, everyone in the city has a mobile phone, I suspect. If I had to think about how I would be comparing pictures, maybe it means that I've got to figure out how best to get people to interact so that we can get that sort of large crowd participation. And then how do you maintain the attention of the crowd once you've actually recruited them? Finally, compensation models, it can be monetary. So different labor markets could have different types of compensation. Crowd management, other crowd management services are costs and trade-offs. Costs and trade-offs is not just speed, also compensation, time, performance, precision, how big your crowd's going to be, and then how do you optimize a skill set? So each of your consumers have different profiles. So how do you take their profiles to understand people like this person is going to be best for this type of task? So one thing I want to leave you with, and this is kind of my last slide, or the second to last, is it's kind of what we took from our investigation. We have a survey pretty extensive, long survey on the different types of crowdsourcing mechanisms that are available to us now and technologies. And we're trying to say, well, if we put this all together and created an infrastructure that supported the crowd, what are the things that we'd be interested in? I guess the biggest thing is we got to figure out ways to deal with different types of people. So there are already existing LinkedIn sites, social sites. There are actually Amazon Mechanical Turk where people are already engaging in crowdsourcing. How do you get profiles of people and connect with those types of systems to get all of the types of people that you want invested? And as we know, there's so many different ways they're producing their profiles. So how do you make specialized interfaces that can pull that information in? So, and that's it, just looking at the right side, that's kind of like where we would pull the information into these specialized interfaces, which I'd like to call web services in a sense. And then you have services in the back end that actually deal with different things like recruitment, compensation, job allocation, and then different solution resolution. The bottom right side is just jobs. The jobs are so diverse. It's difficult to think that you can come up with a specific profile. I think in one of my editorials a few months ago, I said that we would need some sort of crowdsourcing language, like Waddle or Wisdo or something like that talked about what the job would look like and how you would interact. And then finally, there's different interactions protocols that occur. One is the solicitation and recruitment. You have solution sets, and you have different agreements between your crowd, your recruitees, and the actual producers, the people who are actually looking for the information. So basically, I guess the contribution, at least as a panel, I'd like to talk a little bit about our experiences in dealing and mechanizing the crowd and how that could have other social impacts with regards to privacy and the Big Brother effect and things like that. So with that, I think I was given 10 minutes. I think I've hit it. So I look forward to your questions shortly.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to focus on one particular topic that whenever cloud computing comes up, particularly when you talk to non-engineering folks, privacy is an almost immediate kind of cousin of that discussion. Unfortunately, and I think this is somewhat disappointing, that within the engineering community, we don't really have a very precise notion of what we really mean when we talk about privacy, the intersection of the technology and that term. I don't think we're alone. It's not that the lawyers or economists are doing much better, and I'm certainly not going to solve that problem today. What I want to do in the next few minutes is just go through trying to tease apart why some of the notions of privacy that we've had, and this is obviously not a new concept, may not work quite as well as they used to, and why human intuition that we have about privacy as a very emotional thing. We all know when somebody violates our privacy, walks in on us when we don't expect it, or reads an email or a letter that we thought was confidential. We have that gut feeling of privacy, but that doesn't always work for some of the new challenges. So one attempt is, this is an old standby that many of you have seen in undergraduate. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in that privacy actually touches, or lack thereof, touches all levels of that. So you have the fairly basic physiological needs, kind of just for food, water, breathing type of thing. And at that most basic level, violations of privacy can clearly threaten your physical well-being. Somebody can stalk you because they track your location and they can physically endanger you. But then there's also kind of a feeling of safety that goes along with that, and that gets a little tougher. Simply because you often don't know if what happens to you is the result of a privacy violation. If you get a letter in the mail that says, "We regret to inform you that we have chosen another candidate for the job opening that you applied for," you don't know whether that was because somebody else had better grades or more background, or whether somebody saw some Facebook postings of yours that they didn't like for whatever good or bad reason. We don't know if you get turned down for medical insurance, less of a problem now in the US, but still an issue, or life insurance, because somebody knows something about your medical condition that you thought was private. Maybe they got access to the OPM data breach or something. Or they use it to violate your home and property. And then you have the family level, love and belonging, your family and friendship. And we all know how violations of privacy, often at a small scale, can endanger those relationships. Sometimes because people find out the truth about what you did or what somebody else did, and sometimes because they find out things that aren't actually true. And then there's the self-esteem level, just the feeling of embarrassment. Lots of things we do aren't really bad, but there's certainly activities that we don't like exposed to the public, even though they're neither legal nor immoral, but they're just not suitable for public consumption. And finally, and this is, I think, one of the most difficult ones, is the issue that at the highest level, that the lack of privacy may make us fearful, not because anything bad has happened or necessarily will happen, but because we're fearful that if we engage in exploration, we engage in problem solving and some spontaneous activity, that somebody in the future will find that and it will endanger some of our other goals. And then I think is where a large part of the concerns about state-sponsored surveillance as well as private surveillance activities or data gathering come into play. Not so much because there is a concrete harm, and often many industry advocates or indeed people who say, well, I mean, if you've done nothing wrong, why do you worry about what the NSA or Facebook or Google or plug in your favorite or not so favorite corporate name knows about you? This is the classical rejoinder to privacy concerns. But we don't necessarily want to live in a world where our exploration, doing potentially revealing or embarrassing things, are with us forever. And so that, I suspect, has led, in the European context, to movements, however crude and clumsy and maybe in some cases counterproductive, right to be forgotten get into, because they simply aren't human scale ones that are interfering not at a concrete level, but much more at a higher psychological level. And let me also try to divide the risks of privacy violations into three broad categories. Namely, when you have data that is accumulated about you, there's the direct risk, the obvious or not so obvious one. I'll just give two examples that have been discussed widely, namely that Amazon, say, just pick on them as a large e-retailer, knows a lot about you. They can also now price discriminate. They can show you higher or lower prices than somebody else would see. You could argue that's efficient, all of that, but you may not like that, because they know that you look at high-priced item, people have claimed, whether this is an urban legend or not, that if you use a Mac, that you have more, or an iPhone, you have more money, so they can raise the prices that they show you. So there's a possibility that direct data usage, or as has been claimed about Facebook feeds, that they will tailor, in order to get more clicks and all that, the news that you see to what they think you'll like, as opposed to maybe what you might want or need to see in order to be well informed. Then there's a middle category where nobody actually wants to disclose the data, but it does. So the theft of data, the Office of Personnel Management in the federal government, and Anthem, a large health insurer, where they retained data that probably shouldn't have been, and now they're embarrassed, somebody gets fired, but in the end, it's you as the consumer, as the entry in that database, who has to deal with the consequences, either the direct ones or maybe the feared ones that you have. And there's then the more research-oriented one, which occurred a few years ago when I think Yahoo disclosed some data in good intent, and it was de-anonymized without the consent of the people in the database. And then there's the indirect one, where the individual data item isn't terribly privacy relevant. It's just one data item. You visited the New York Times webpage, or you bought a bar of soap in a drugstore. But it gets aggregated into a aggregation of data that suddenly paints a pretty detailed, correct or incorrect picture of you. And then there's a final one, which garnered a New York Times story a few days ago, that even if you trust the organization that you gave data to or that collected data about you, they may get sold, and the most valuable piece of that is the data, and you have no right to object to that particular sale. So the old model of privacy protection was one of permissions and privacy statements. So you have, if you look at Android, every Android app, iPhone app, has a set of permissions. And often they're not really terribly intuitive. A well-known example is, I've just picked up because it's obvious, blindingly obvious. In this case, you have a flashlight application, which is about as primitive as you can get, but it has access to your precise location. Flashlights don't need precise location, in case you hadn't noticed, but they need it for advertising, because that's how they fund themselves. They need access to your photos and media files, to your camera, because that's where flashlight hardware is situated. So they suddenly have access to lots of things because the model of permissions doesn't really match what you're trying to do, namely have a flashlight that lights up the back of your smartphone. We also have a set of permission model or a disclosure model which primarily relies on the fact that where we don't have, in the US in particular, privacy protections themselves, the Federal Trade Commission can go after companies if they have a privacy statement and then violate it. That's classical consumer fraud, as old as the Federal Trade Commission is. I won't go through kind of the fraud definition, but that's where you don't get people on the privacy violation itself. You get them because they lie about what promises they made. The consequences of which is that smart companies essentially say, we'll do anything and everything with your data. You have no rights. And that means we can't defraud you because we told you we'll sell it to anybody, we'll do anything with it. Really, the opposite is to your disadvantage. So that model doesn't really work all that well. Plus, as many people have pointed out, if you wanted to actually read all the privacy policies, given that you don't really have a choice in that matter as to whether you accept it or not, you would have to spend 76 work days each year just simply reading all the privacy policies that you come in contact with. Again, it doesn't do any good. It's a complete waste of time. So the notion that privacy disclosure would be insufficient is, I don't think, just viable anymore, given the number of entities one interacts with. So we have the difficulty of defining privacy. The emphasis on data gathering, which underlies the permission model in Android, for example, is unhelpful because the same information can be completely innocent, or at least mildly annoying, or it can be extremely sensitive. Think location data. It can be just somewhat useful if it shows ads that are relevant to your current city that you're in, and can obviously use to track you throughout the day and find out where you worship, what medical doctors you visit, what bars you might frequent, and whatever else you might be doing. And so I think longer term, we really need to look at a more comprehensive approach for disclosure and management that takes into account not just how data is gathered and who has it, but what is the whole life cycle of data. For example, how long is it being retained, and for what purposes? Also, we've had a data privacy model that was very much based on an old-style data where you more or less explicitly contributed the data. You filled out a web form, you used some loyalty card in the grocery store. Nowadays, much of the data is implicitly gathered by sensors or by things that you just do, like read a newspaper article online or post something on Facebook, use Google Maps to navigate, turn your thermostat up or down, walk down the street when there's a face recognition camera in place. All of these is you don't actually explicitly type something into a form, it just happens. So we have a number of practical problems, which in the interest of time I won't go through in great detail, is how do we treat different kinds of data? That's been the classical US model, is you have different treatments for educational, medical, financial, and other data. The most well-protected data in the US, in case you're less familiar with that, is video rental records, simply because we had a Supreme Court justice who got into trouble with those. But we have limited usefulness of that type of approach. It's hard to estimate the harm and who should bear the risk. The downside could be tremendous. You could lose your life potentially if somebody stalks you. But how do we evaluate the risk and what risks do we take into account based on the hierarchy that I mentioned? And should I have real economic choices what I do? A recent example in networking space, AT&T offered two versions of a UVerse service. One where you had standard privacy, and one where you paid, but that cost you $20, $30 more each month, and one where you consented to having AT&T monitor your web browsing by looking at IP addresses and things, similar things. So you could argue, if this is purely an economic transaction, for each individual website, privacy could be pretty cheap. So on a global scale, so US is more and all of that, but that's the data I have. In 2014, each Facebook user contributed about $8 to the bottom line of Facebook. So you could argue that Facebook could be completely privacy preserving by selling you an $8 a year membership in Facebook, where you would say no ads, no tracking, nothing. And I suspect some number of people would actually find that attractive. However, the problem looks a little tougher when you actually do that across the global ad revenue across all services. So US ad revenue, this is again US only for a variety of reasons, is about $14 billion a quarter. So if you take 80 million roughly US households, so you would have to pay about $700 a year if you were to replace all the advertisement, and as we all know, most of the privacy data-related gathering that takes place today, not all of it, but most of it is for advertising, digital advertising. So you would have to pay about $700 extra a year to basically tell every newspaper and Google and Facebook and all the other websites that you don't want advertisement, you don't want them to gather your behavior, and I'm not sure how many people would be willing on a per household basis to do that. So what I'm trying to say is we need a much better and more systematic way of looking at privacy. We can't just take it as this amorphous single thing, and we can no longer look at it as kind of the old model of explicit user provides data to company model in an era where much of the data is gathered anonymously, unseen, and behind the scenes in that environment. And our existing models just don't work very well. And they also don't deal very well with risk assessment, meaning probabilistic harm that might occur, even if you believe a harm model is appropriate for that. And I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, because we have the next, Eric will go give a talk that has to go earlier, so I make it very short, okay? What I try to do is, I think, instead of talking about all the benefit, I try to talk about the risks, the problems, so make this panel discussion more interesting. So I think we have a convergence of cloud computing and big data. And basically, when they converge with each other, creating big problems. Okay, everything is big. Big problem for the people and the world. Okay, we will talk about each one: security, privacy, ethical, legal, social implication, have and have not. Okay? Now, security. So people try to sell you the cloud, try to sell you the big data, telling you everything is better, everything is secure. But let me just ask you, which one is safer? You're putting all the eggs into one basket. or separate them into multiple baskets. Which one is safer? One basket? Multiple baskets? Right? I would choose multiple baskets. Okay? So that's one important thing. Now, so there's a lot of your problem with this cloud computing. So I think I went to the NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. They have also the cloud computing workshop. So I basically argued this way, and I said cloud computing, if you don't do it correctly, could be more dangerous. The other thing is the privacy. There are people, I think we heard about several panelists, and many of you also are aware, there are a lot of companies collecting data about us. Okay? We don't want to mention certainly the next speaker, Google, Facebook, everything. Now, one thing is, I understand my children, they're all on Facebook. Okay? And one thing I say, I want to join them. They say, no, you cannot join me. Okay. So, and I do have a Peter Tian type of Facebook entry, but it was not set up by me. I don't know who set it up. Okay. Now, so what I did is I did creating a phony name to join one of my children's things. So by doing that way, I can slip into their Facebook to figure out what's going on. Okay. Now, but the important thing is we are right now collecting everything. You go to the street in many countries in here, there's a lot of cameras. So we are actually a lot of information you don't know. Your people outside of your family probably know more than you. Okay? Now, let me I'm going to say a lot of bad things about this, but I want to mention one important thing, one good thing about Google. Okay? Why did only in the last couple of months, I find out one advantage of Google. Google collecting a lot of information. And the last few months, I tried to sell my house in Louisiana. After a couple of years, I said, gee, I need to sell it before I move to other places. Okay, now, so I have to clean up. I have collected about 30 years of things in the whole house. And then what's the problem? I cannot throw everything away. I have to look at each piece of information. Is this useful? Is this important? It's not just about me, about my children, about my family, my parents, whatever. And my children, they all left. They came every 10 days. They called me back and say, oh, I need something there in the third drawer somewhere. Okay? So I have to figure out whether they need it or not. So I wish some company automatically keep track of everything. So I don't have to decide what to throw away or not to throw away. Okay? Okay, then I can put the house immediately on sale. Okay. Finally, that's one advantage. Now, the other thing is, let me go to the next bullet point. Which one, government, hacker, adversary, is more dangerous? Okay? Now, people live here. I think if you are a U.S. citizen, you are somewhat more safe. Okay? Because the government, U.S. government, restricted by the law not to monitor U.S. citizens. Okay? However, if you are in other country, or you could be a little bit dangerous. So government could be a big thing. Okay? Could be, they collect a lot of information about you. Now, people can get a lot of things about you. The other second topic is ethical. We right now can pay money to get data about almost anybody. Okay, you can even get their credit data, everything. Now, legal, all the laws are many years behind technologies, so that's a problem. We cannot just solve that. We probably have to train. We need to have a special session for all the legislators. Now, let me mention the last point, have versus have not. Many of you probably heard about, we're so close to Wall Street. A couple years ago, we have this 1% versus 99%. Okay? Now, so people are revolting against, the 1%. Now, this is not just happening in the United States, actually happening everywhere. If we look at carefully about the history, all the revolutions are basically based on this 99% versus 1%. Okay? I look at the Chinese history. Every 300 years, there will be a new dynasty. Okay? The new people revolve. Okay? And change, throw away the king, the queens, whatever. Okay? So that's the problem. If you look at Europe, the French Revolution, the same thing. So that's the big thing. Now, so that's what I'm saying is, we are, the people here, are somewhat fortunate. We are probably, may not be the 1%, we're maybe top 20%, whatever. So for our self-interest, we need to make the other 80% happier. Okay? So if you look at the name, the Social Security system, what does that mean? What does that mean? What's the meaning in that name? The meaning is security. It's a security for yourself, security for the society. You want to make the bottom people happy, comfortable, so they don't revolt. So what we are going to do in the future, suggestions, is basically, I think probably Eric will talk about that, in the developing country, we need to make them, we want to either, because we are nice people, we want to help them, or because self-interest, we want to help them. So that make them have a better life and better utilize the technology. So that's my point. Let me just stop here. Thank you.
We will use Eric's algorithm, so I will alternate between the two microphones. Please come up to the microphone to ask your questions. And since Eric has a deadline of 6 o'clock, he has a phone call to make. So I will propose that we start with a question for Eric first. And in this particular case, he's done work in India. And maybe he can share with us his experience in terms of the last question of haves versus have-nots from technologist point of view.
Sure, I'll certainly say that I've been working with other companies for about, I guess, about 2003, 12 years now. A lot of the videos, and the reason I got into that was actually in part post 9/11. I kind of felt that most of our reactions were pretty fear-based, and that long-term security only comes from hope, it comes from fear. And so I feel like, getting to your point, real security comes when much broader fraction of the population has hope. They don't have to be actually in great shape, but that is more to have hope. You look at why people live in urban slums. It's not because urban slums have a higher quality of life than the rural villages. They have to quality of life is worse. The difference is urban slums have hope. People who live there are in transition in their mind onto something better. And even though the temporary stuff is not so nice, it's just temporary. It's a hope is motivating. I actually do believe that technology has a role in not only hope, but in actualization improvement. For sure, the biggest impact on GDP over the last 50 years has not been donations by U.S., world nations, or any of those groups. The biggest factor has actually been more impact on GDP by far. And less data on this, so if you look at the impact of broadband, per data on it says it's actually more impactful than the phone. India, for example, found that the United States have at least 25% penetration of broadband, which is not that many, but early. Those states see bigger increases in GDP than they saw from penetration itself. And my belief is that's because actually the cell phone is a personal device in the first
really enjoyed the panel. I think it was Mercury presenting. And I have two questions for the old panelists. I agree with Eric that hope is very important for any problem we have. But there is also an issue that I think mentioned. The privacy is something really related with individual security, safety, and repeating yourself. That's very important. So we all have cell phones, but we all also fear that maybe the newer generation, we are already okay. We have phones ourselves when we grow up. But the newer generation, those young kids, so they do text so much, they lots of things that are really full, and they constantly spend so much time on this, they kind of lose a lot of self-identity and develop themselves. So that's one of the things that actually constantly in fact for me, who is thinking about how much I should restrict my daughter to use the cell phone. Because I can see the lucky effect, and I can also see the least lucky effect. So it's really an assassination that US has been creating a lot of original products, original innovation, but we are not actually encourage that and tolerate that. Maybe in 20 years, 50 years, we don't have this because the kids are not reading things. So that's why I think it's a difficult part. But these are not whole. That's the thing. So maybe, I don't know what is the solution, but I think it's one of the things. Every country is facing, not just US, but it's not just privacy for the individual, but also how to create more, encourage more creativity with this massive access to information, with a lot more ways for people to think, to innovate. But that's actually is something very happening.
One thing I didn't say about privacy is that to some extent this is also essentially a race to bottom model. Namely, every advertising supported organization believes that they can squeeze a little bit more CPM revenue, ad revenue out of it if they target just a little bit more precisely. It's not clear that anybody actually wins by that. And they get all the privacy risks and issues there. So it strikes me as somewhat similar to the problem we have really in the industrial age, where there was an incentive to cut down on worker safety, for example, and child labor, and all of these things, because you could produce more cheaply than your competitor if you were children, but everybody ended up being worse off. The way that I see it, I don't get into that, I have some of the same flavor in some sense. So, and what we have in a lot of struggles happening with Somatic is, at least in many of the Western countries, earlier industrializing countries, we have at least understanding that you essentially avoid the race to bottom by having a floor. Typically set by government in some cities, or sometimes self-regulation, where that is feasible, sometimes by negotiation agreements between the council, for example, and those under the government. But like organizations, so that in the end, everybody was better off, at least in that sense. The other piece, and that goes to volume versus self-volume, and I work as a mentioned on the second page, you get a lot of people saying, well, why do you worry about broadband availability? Everybody has cell phones. But as you indirectly pointed out, the cell phone is largely, not as you said, entertain yourself device. You can basically be spaced out, undefined, ignore your environment, you don't have to accept entertainment service. The infinite supply of entertainment available, just like it was never before. You have now every movie at your disposal, every song ever recorded type of thing, every blog ever written. What it doesn't allow you to do is clean content really easily, not just share pictures. And so enabling creativity by people, is important. The other piece which you really like, and that's what I don't have to answer for, is the lack and destruction of community organizations. If you look out around the first three investor revolution, the government and the employer side were forced to respond to individually powerless individuals because they organized into mass movements of any sort. We don't see a whole lot of that happening. We can argue probably for miles of why that is, but let's say it's a possibility. It happens on some issues. For example, these Supreme Court rulings are an example of that. But they happen because there was a community to some extent. But some of the economic ones, I'm not sure we're ready. And I don't want to answer that. And we kind of control outsourcing all that. Unless it's right organized more than just liking a political statement on Facebook or signing a change.org petition to something like something. So, I don't know. I don't know anything about that.
I'm a play devil's advocate a little bit, because I'm often telling my son to get his head out of the phone. He's in it all the time. Phone, TV, iPad, all that stuff. So I often wonder though, if I was a devil's advocate here, I could suggest that privacy in some sense slows or filters the production of information. So because it's forgetting the amount of information that's coming forward. But when you think about it, is privacy winning in that sense? It seems like we're getting more and more applications and more and more information, and each one kind of limits the amount of privacy that we have. So, if we put this on its head, we might suggest that we need to train a new type of generation of citizens, a new generation of computer scientists. And I'm going to say this, I don't know what I mean, but it's kind of provocative, is that maybe we need our kids to be like that. Maybe there's just saying hands single, maybe that could be like my son, he samples is interesting. That's a different thing. So it's worth thinking about. I think you have a son that's 10 and a son that's 3, and each one I think is perhaps more engaged in electronics than the previous. So I guess it's something more to think about whether as we get more and more and data becomes more big, will we need the types of humans, the types of individuals that can operate at that level? It may not be us, we may not be equipped to do that. So I don't know. That's a different account.
Maybe just say two comments. One thing, trying to compare the number of users on the street. I think we are more higher percent of children and young people versus more senior older people. Okay? Because the security is basically the human nature. When you are young, you don't have anything to lose. Okay? You can open up the when you have more things, you worry about doing the other things you want to do. Okay? So that's what I'm talking about. The other is the cell phone kind of issue. Cell phone, I think the human regulation. Humans are more lazy. Okay? So when you have a lot of your neighbors, you just keep on spending time. So you don't want to do something else. Okay? So that's another thing. Now, worse scientifically, they want to talk about something called privacy. Privacy, I think, is a very kind of, even for myself, even for anyone, your privacy is depending on every point, every time, every situation. You want to, sometimes you want to protect, sometimes you want to protect. Let me give you an example. I was involved in the conversation in Arizona, filming and working with conversation. And then there are people coming in, and they want to stay with whatever. And they try to put things on their neck and all that.
items are programmed by themselves. I don't think they're actually behind the law. I mean, it's such kind of learners that I don't think a lot of people their social communicate with the world.
Yes.
I'm going to change the topic a little, for the benefit of humanity. There's something called open data, which can be used for good. Looking for humanity plots, and WPC does a survey, or calculation of a survey of what's open in different countries. So do you have any thoughts about using open data for the benefit of
Oh, Eric should go first because the time is expired.
One problem we have in that is in India, when satellite photos, this is not good. Using satellite photos to figure out are construction projects done by the government actually being executed in the places and it turns out one of the classic kind of corruption is people who don't build roads that have been paid for, which is visible on satellite. Or they build the roads in the wrong place. Usually to the senator's house, for example. So it turns out we have these entities on satellites that are fantastic for certain kinds of projects like airports and roads and bridges to actually tell if they're being built or not. And that's all based on open data. And in general, the data is already open, it's just not always easy to get. The U.S. government, somewhere where it is trying to open up all the U.S. government data through APIs versus through big documents. So the API that uses kind of data and documents is not great. And that's going to be a long time. I'm very hopeful on that. Even that has some personal issue. The U.S. government would like to release veterans' genetic data for research. So they have the right to do it, but they also have anonymized data. For instance, can anonymize that data? Not that clear. So, open question. Yeah, I do that. They use that data to do it. Original data sets for the
I'll mention about having been on the government side and we see all the time data seems closed and hasn't for a while. And it worked quite well. So, for example, technical example, the CCS project measuring water and basically measures moment residential landline connectivity and has an ongoing project for more and that data is quite useful to other researchers which instead of impossible the traditional model where the only people who can actually use the data are staff and research agencies. However, one should also be aware that in order for the data to really produce more than just simply pretty pictures or research videos as useful for the job, you need to look at two things. And the data is in some sense actionable and it needs to act on it. I'll give you again the plugins here. One of the big contentions out of new in foreign policy is the relative cost of broadband in different countries. It turns out there's surprisingly no really good data on pricing for broadband available. And so that is a question because the data isn't being gathered and it's not because the government doesn't in this particular case regularly doesn't want to gather the data, it's because interested parties have no interest in disclosing data. Companies, private services, that those are the questions we need to answer. And the second one is, in many cases, we have, and I see that problem in general in the U.S., we have this death by analysis problem. And we just have enough money left to do lots and lots of reports. Again, broadband is a good example. I don't know how many hundreds of broadband reports have been written over the years. How many reports about 911 services? How many reports And they often substitute for action simply because it's either the kind of will or money available for actually do something about it. So we keep writing reports because that's what we can cheaply well. So I would also say what data can actually be realistically, and only really do something because it willingness to change as opposed to just providing another report that gets shallow and is going to be done obviously essentially the same conclusions.
Yeah, I'm sorry that we are past the 6 o'clock, so there's the official end of the panel. And we can have the panelists still stay here and answer informal questions from the audience. So if you would like to talk to the panelists, you can stay around and we can still ask them. But before we finish, I would like to give them a chance to give maybe advice for technology creators in the audience. Panelists have all created technologies of their own, so maybe they want to have a short summary in terms of what advice they have for creating new technologies and the potential impact of the new technologies on the society and on people. So.
Yeah, I think we, I guess over the last 5 to 10 or decade, we looked at information that could be marked up and be annotated in ways that's most useful. So I think if I had one advice, and one of the things we're struggling currently is actually interacting with information in a different format. We spent a great deal of time dealing with semantics over the last decade or so, and it's effective. But I also think it's important for us as creators of data information to start to think about how we can best normalize what we do as far as profile of information such as be interoperable, even outside of actually having the information. So I think many of our companies that communicating with one another, we have needs. So I think it's important for us to consider that in that sort of sharing aspect.
I have a slightly different facet to that. One of the items that I think is not quite appreciated is the research enterprise can be both peaceful and very good in the sense everybody researches the same thing at the same time because and that's what the finding is, this is what we see at conferences, whatever it happens to be. And then everybody moves on. There's probably an interesting sociological study of what happens when we just keep, and then suddenly everybody says, oh, that was slow. Nobody does research and whatever anymore. So, but what I also discovered is that there are lots of real world problems that nobody looks at because there is no interface between people who have problems, people who have the money, and the researchers that find it. So, NSF or in the middle, as well as for private and public entities that have real world problems, but there's really other numerator. I'll give you an example of something because it's something I'm personally familiar with. Is when I first started looking at the 911 system in the United States, it was essentially, as far as I could tell, on a single university who ever looked at that system. Despite being one primary interfaces, if you want to call it that, into law enforcement and other emergency services, medical, and so on. At some point, people had looked at it as one system. Technology essentially on treatment had not progressed since the 1970s. It seemed like freedom monitors that got bigger, but that was all right. So it was an opportunity where the number of applications to get out of it wasn't all that low, but the interesting problems, issues to get out of it was significantly low. There are lots of these niche problems out there that you really benefit from attention from computer scientists, networking, data, people, but they're not going to get, these are not people that show up at conferences. If they show up at conferences, they respect the discipline, they respect the industry, or whatever you want to call it. They don't show up at actually ACM conferences. And that, I think, is one of the but also more opportunities to go over for these type of issues by talking to people that don't show up out to shop academic or industrial conferences. A lot of them is buyer side as opposed to on the demand side.
Let me say something first on the research side. In terms of particular security policy, when you look at security, the security, there are several issues to address. One is the need more scientific, more rigorous knowledge. Right now, most security is critical scientific knowledge. So they don't need a call and data. So it's more problem than just solve some of the problem. It doesn't have theory behind. So we need some kind of theory for security, the other part, there's another easy problem is particularly the security side. Here, working closely with the cybersecurity group here. So find out is different things to duplicate, even if you consider. It's very difficult to duplicate a line. You see that techniques. You look right up, but you know, you have a situation, but you can't duplicate knowledge. So that's another problem. So when you can solve that, let me take the privacy kind of thing. Privacy, as I said, was the personal advice for people who are working. And I served on the Air Force Advisory Board, so we had the honor to go to the board of the nuclear agency in Washington, D.C. area. So look at what we have. They have killed some of the technologies. So basically, we have to look towards everything. So basically, it's thinking this way. You don't be famous, okay? If you are famous, if you are the person of interest, you are potentially involved. Okay? So that's certainly the recipe for a good city. You don't want it. There's a lot of problems, a lot of places where you are famous, you could be involved.
So before we thank the panelists, let me say that Professor Jia Zhang has some announcements. So please stay on for a few minutes. No? Oh, yeah, of course. Okay. No announcement. So let's thank our panelists for your interest in this session. Okay, so that ends today's sessions. See you tomorrow. Thank you very much.